Okay, so Jason, in a previous episode, we defined SPIFFE, SPIFFE, which is an ID that you can attach to a workload, such as an agent, but could be other things. SPIRE, which stands for SPIFFE Runtime Environment, is part of this whole ecosystem. What does SPIRE do?
SPIRE is really two things.
Okay.
One of them is essentially, think of it like an intermediate CA.
Okay.
It's also the agent that gets the cert from that intermediate and basically gives it to the thing that you want to give that certificate to. It's almost like, think about like an Acme protocol agent.
Okay.
It's people who really know their stuff are going to throw stones at me, but I'm trying to make analogies to make this obvious. So in other words, it is both the intermediate CA as well as the agent that's actually moving the certs back, basically calling the certs. What is interesting about it, though, is that an Acme agent is not cryptographically bound to the CA.
Okay.
A SPIRE agent is. And one of the reasons why this is the case is because in the world of traditional places you would use Acme, the ability to say, hey, I'm a domain, do the domain control validation for me, please, Acme. That's all that's required to prove that you can pull a cert.
Right, correct.
As long as you have the EAB credential that opens up the ability to get the cert from the CA.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of SPIRE, you don't want the agent to self-attest to itself.
Because at that point, then we've proven nothing.
So in other words, if you just hand a cert over to an agent, maybe you've just weaponized an adversary, essentially. And so if you think about one of the most easy use cases in terms of how this kind of works in bootstrapping, is that a SPIRE agent being cryptographically bound to the CA means that you're standing up the agent in a way that the agent itself is trusted. So the agent, you can't, as the bad guy, just go off and create your own SPIRE agent somewhere. You could absolutely stand up an Acme agent if you're a bad guy. But what are you going to do with it if you don't get the EAB credentials?
Right.
But in this case, what's doing the attesting is the SPIRE agent. Part of the technology in SPIRE, which is quite interesting, is the fact that, let's say you're running a workload inside of a Kubernetes cluster. Mm-hmm. You can actually use the Kubernetes cluster itself to say, yes, this is a legitimate workload. And so therefore, SPIRE is aware of that. And so if you check out in terms of being a legitimate workload working inside of Kubernetes, the SPIRE agent is built that way so that there are several different things it can look at to say, yes, you're a legitimate thing that's asking me for a cert. And that's what I think a lot of people forget. It's sometimes surprising to people that SPIRE is essentially an intermediate CA. And the reason I say intermediate CA and not a rooted CA in itself is because even SPIRE themselves, the people who wrote the standard, say you really should use an upstream authority. In other words, you should root it in a proper private certificate authority. And therefore, SPIRE acts as an intermediate.
Got it.
The SPIRE agent is installed wherever the certs need to go. Mm-hmm. It is cryptographically bound to the SPIRE server, CA. And then the agents themselves, the workloads themselves, basically have to be in such a way that, the SPIRE agent needs to be aware of the system that you're coming from to be able to tell your legitimacy as an agent. And there's many ways of doing that. It's beyond the scope of this podcast.
So when you say, anchor this to a CA, essentially, it immediately strikes me that we're talking about, obviously, a private PKI CA. Is there a public CA use case for this?
Not that I know of.
Okay, so this is really going to be my CA that I own and I control.
That's right.
Okay, great.
And one of the things I would love to show you, in fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll put graphics up on the YouTube video of this podcast. A SPIRE issued certificate, SPIFFE cert, SPIFFE identifier cert,
Yeah.
will have no common name typically,
Okay.
and no DNS SAN because it's not necessary. It's not needed. So, is it possible to do SPIFFE over Acme? Technically, yes. You absolutely can form a certificate and issue it via Acme into service, but it's going to end up with the CN and the you have to choose how the cert is formed that way. But I think the more common use case is going to be a SPIRE issued certificate with a SPIFFE identifier.
Got it. Okay.
So that's SPIFFE and that's SPIRE, Tim.
All right.
At the highest
Jay.
level, yeah. Thanks.
Great.